Hello, my name is Kathryn Barush, and I teach art history and religion at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. Thank you so much for watching my presentation, which is on pilgrimage in the time of pandemic, backyards, maps, and apps. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I've got some slides to show you today. Okay, hopefully everyone can see this. As we know, many major religious pilgrimages have been canceled or curtailed in an effort to contain the spread of COVID-19. But as the historians among us also know, pilgrims have faced travel delays and cancellations for centuries. Reasons have ranged from financial hardship and agricultural responsibilities to what is now all too familiar for modern pilgrims, plague and ill health. Then, as now, one strategy has been to bring the pilgrimage into the home or to the religious community. This presentation will focus on a few not medieval, but contemporary artworks created or engaged during the pandemic that link one sacred landscape to another, from the Camino in Spain to a backyard in the Pacific Northwest, from St. Kevin's Way in Ireland to an urban neighborhood in Daly City, California, and from Glastonbury, England to home computers and mobile devices everywhere. While place-based pilgrimage is an embodied practice, this brief presentation posits that perhaps it can be experienced in its fullness through the built environment and collective viewing practices. Through the centuries and across culture, those who long to go on a sacred journey would find ways to do so through travel or other means. Reading travel narratives, tracing a map with the finger or with the eye, or holding a souvenir brought back from a sacred site helped facilitate a real sense of travel for the homebound pilgrim. Through these visual or material aids, people felt as though they too were having a pilgrimage experience and even connecting with others. And here I show you a little illuminated book of hours with a pilgrimage badge sewn into the upper left-hand corner. Another example is the story of the Dominican friar Felix Fabry, who is known for recording his own pilgrimages in various formats, some geared to the laity and some for his brothers. Fabry was approached in the 1490s by a group of cloistered nuns who desired a devotional exercise so they too could have an experience of pilgrimage, but without breaking the promise of a sheltered life where they lived cloistered away from the outside world. Fabry produced Die Pilger, a virtual pilgrimage in the form of a day-to-day guidebook to Santiago de Compostela, Jerusalem, and Rome. In these cities, pilgrims would encounter sites and scenes associated with many facets of their religion: shrines to honor Jesus and the saints, relics, great cathedrals, sacred landscapes, and miraculous events and stories. Fabry's guidebook sent the pilgrim on an imaginative journey of 1,000 miles, but without having to take a single step. As my research has shown, both before and during the pandemic, DIY pilgrimages are not just a medieval phenomenon. And this kind of strategy of bringing the pilgrimage home or into the domestic sphere has been going on for quite some time. So my background is in art history and visual culture, and I just finished writing a book that examines pilgrimage as an embodied practice, but indeed argues that it can be experienced through the built environment, through assemblages of souvenirs, and through vocal chanting. Each chapter focuses on a contemporary artwork that links a sacred landscape to another, from Lourdes to South Africa, Jerusalem to England, and Ecuador to California. It brings various fields into conversation by offering a number of lenses and theoretical approaches through which to engage objects that become sites, activated through religious and ritual praxis, and negotiated not just with the eyes, but with a multiplicity of senses. So one modern example of bringing a pilgrimage into the domestic sphere is Phil Volker's Camino, which was mapped onto a plot of land behind his home in the Pacific Northwest. Volker is a 72-year-old father and now grandfather, woodworker, and veteran who mapped the Camino de Santiago on his backyard. Phil prays the rosary as he walks for those who have been impacted by the pandemic, his family, his neighbors, and the world. After a cancer diagnosis in 2013, a few things came together to inspire Volker to build a backyard Camino. including the film The Way, a pocket-sized meditations called Everyday Camino with Annie by Annie O'Neill, and the story of Eratosthenes, the Greek polymath from the 2nd century BC, who figured out a way to measure the circumference of the Earth using the sun, a stick, and a well. So his mapping project was somewhat analogous to Phil's. And Phil says, for me, Eratosthenes was the great grand godfather of do-it-yourselfers. How can someone pull off this kind of a caper with things on hand in his own backyard? It got me thinking, what else can come out of one's backyard? So Volker began walking a circuitous route around his 10-acre property on Vashon Island. It was a chance to exercise, which his doctors had encouraged as part of his cancer treatment, but it also created a space to think and to pray. Each lap around the property is just about a half mile. Realizing that he was covering quite some distance, Phil found a map of the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage route to track his progress, calculating that 909 laps would get him from Saint Jean-Pied-de-Port to the Cathedral of St. James. And here he is with his logbook as he tracks his progress along his Camino. To date, he's completed about 3 500-mile Caminos without leaving his backyard. Thanks to a documentary film, Volker's daily blog, and an article in the magazine Northwest Catholic, the Backyard Camino has attracted many visitors, some simply curious, but others who are seeking healing and solace. During the unprecedented spring semester of 2020, as we all went under shelter-in-place orders here in Berkeley, we watched Phil's Camino, the film, as part of a graduate course I teach on art and pilgrimage. The story of Volker's Backyard Camino inspired Sister Sarah Postlethwaite of the Verbum Dei Missionary Fraternity to map St. Kevin's Way, a 19-mile pilgrimage route in County Wicklow, Ireland, onto a series of daily 1.5-mile circuits in the urban neighborhood of Daly City, California. The route in Wicklow, Ireland rambles along roads and countryside, from Hollywood to the ruins of the monastery that St. Kevin, a 6th century abbot, had founded in Glendalough. Postlethwaite had intended to travel back to her native Ireland in the spring of 2020 to walk the route in person, but due to pandemic-related travel restrictions, she brought the pilgrimage home to Daly City. Every so often, Postlethwaite would check in on Google Maps to see where she was along the Irish route, pivoting the camera to see surrounding trees, or at one point, finding herself virtually in the center of an old stone circle. Several joined Postlethwaite's walk in solidarity, both in the US and overseas. After each day's walk, Sarah paused at the shed at her community house, where she had drawn a 2-scale version of the market cross at Glendalough. As Postlethwaite traced the intersecting knots, circles, and image of the crucified Christ with her chalk, she reflected not just on the suffering caused by the pandemic, but also about issues of racism, justice, and privilege. In particular, she remembered Ahmaud Arbery, a Black jogger shot by 2 white men in a fatal confrontation in February 2020. She inscribed his name on the chalk cross, as you can see on the bottom right. The final case study will turn to a real pilgrimage translated into an online space through a GPX mapping app. In July, I collaborated with the British Pilgrimage Trust to create a narrated virtual pilgrimage from Glastonbury Abbey to Wells Cathedral in England that can also be broken into 2 pilgrimages in a day, Glastonbury and Wells, as you see here. Our goal was to reveal the richness of British culture in a place of deep mystery. The route centered around 2 things: healing water and the rich overlay of traditions and stories. It was an excellent opportunity for interreligious dialogue as we introduced spaces of encounter that are layered with significance that cross and transcend religious, cultural, and even temporal boundaries. There are a couple of different options for experiencing this route. One is an annotated essay punctuated with art and song at pivotal points of cultural and historical interest along the route. And the other way is to participate at home through a GPX mapping app, which can be downloaded to a mobile device. It can be either engaged as a virtual experience, or the actual physical route can be followed when not under lockdown orders, of course. So there are a couple of ways to do this, as I was just saying. And so, for example, this is an image from St. Cuthbert's Church, which is one of the places that the pilgrim will encounter along the way. And we wrote, "Look out for the tower on the horizon, emerging from the trees," which Simon Jenkins calls the climactic example of the vertical group of Somerset towers, designed not as a stack of separate stages, but as a soaring unity. So you've got a little bit of architectural history. And then we point to a collection of late medieval painted sculpture, which was rediscovered during renovations in 1840, that have been moved to safe storage to prevent fading and damage. So the virtual pilgrim, as well as the pilgrimage on foot that's using the mapping app, can then navigate to the collection where these images and objects are kept, and you can actually have a close look at very high-res, beautiful digital images. We also have them lie down at St. Cuthbert's, where the ceiling is a riot of sculpted painted angels, rosettes, and symbols of heraldry, which was restored in the 60s. And we suggest that they lie down and soak in the color, so they can actually do that either on site or they can do it on their mobile device. And there are also opportunities to explore archival material. Here we have a image of the Glastonbury tour in 1677 and today. And there's also some experiences, there are some opportunities for musical interludes and for experiences of sound. So you can theoretically pause at the Bishop's Palace Garden and read a related poem by T.S. Eliot, or you can stop at the Church of St. John and listen to Van Morrison's Summertime in England, which was inspired by the site. The virtual pilgrimage does have the advantage of accessibility for those who are not able to travel. And while we did include text, it's an annotated essay, we also included these oral elements of song and music in an effort to engage more than one sense. So just like the film The Way inspired Phil to his backyard Camino, it is possible that virtual pilgrimage opportunities can beget foot pilgrimages. The virtual pilgrimage was actually picked up by Catherine Fairweather of the British newspaper The Guardian, who said, "After the easing of lockdown, I celebrated with a British Pilgrimage Trust route via app that guided me from the city of Wells to the iconic pilgrimage landmark of the Glastonbury tour. I was drawn by their description of ley lines, green men, leaping water, fire-breathing dragons, and angels in high places. I followed their counsel to pause, breathe, and interact with the landscape." In addition to Fairweather's comments, we also received a number of testimonials after the links to the Wells and Glastonbury pilgrimage circulated. And the comments show that for some, it functioned as a souvenir for those who had walked the route in person. For example, Charles J. says via email, "A nice reminder of our pilgrimage to Wells Cathedral in that pre-COVID period. That seems like years ago." And another pilgrim found the sort of coincidence that Camino pilgrims sometimes call trail magic. Jonathan H. wrote, "Thanks for this. I noticed the date of Van Morrison's Montreux performance of 1980 is the 18th of June, today's date by coincidence." Finally, for others, the virtual pilgrimage served as an introduction to day journeys and reopened paths and routes through the UK. An analog to this might be the vast number of pilgrims that were inspired to walk the Camino de Santiago after watching the film The Way, such as Phil. Sir Simon Jenkins wrote, "I have much enjoyed your pocket pilgrimages. I must try to get on one when good times return." So in conclusion, I think that there are elements that are both lost and gained when pilgrimage moves into the virtual sphere. And hopefully a close look at these 3 case studies offered some insight into how they are both created and perceived. Before I sign off, I want to leave you with a brief coda. Phil Volker's cancer has progressed to stage 4, and he celebrated his 100th chemo treatment back in 2017, but he is still walking and praying on a regular basis and has done so throughout the pandemic. He offers the following advice. For folks starting on their own backyard Camino, I think that creating the myth is the most important consideration. Study maps, learn to pronounce the names of the town, walk in the dust and mud, be out there in the rain, drink their wine and eat their food, relearn to pretend. I just want to point to a few resources that were used during this presentation. One is the British Pilgrimage Trust Virtual Pilgrimages, which you can find at britishpilgrimage.org. Sarah Postlethwaite's pilgrimage can be viewed as a video on YouTube. The address is there. Phil's Camino can be found at philscamino.com. And finally, I invite you to follow me at Pilgrim Travels on Instagram and Twitter. So thank you for watching this presentation, and I look forward to discussing it at the conference. Bye now.